The time that U.S. prisoners spend on death row has gotten increasingly longer in recent years, and raises questions about the constitutionality of this added punishment. Although the U.S. Supreme Court has not addressed this issue, it has been repeatedly cited as a serious concern by death penalty experts in the U.S. and by courts outside the U.S. Shortening the time on death row would be difficult without either a significant allocation of new resources or a risky curtailment of necessary reviews. America's death row population is aging significantly. 574 prisoners were 60 years old or older as of 2019. That figure represents a growing senior death row population, which numbered just 39 in 1996. Some death row seniors committed crimes late in life, but many are there at such advanced age because of the inevitable slowness of the capital appeals process. Unlike elderly prisoners in the general population, death row seniors typically are not housed in prison geriatric facilities or placed in end-of-life programs, but rather are often segregated in individual cells within special facilities. Death row prisoners in the U.S. typically spend more than a decade awaiting execution, or court rulings overturning their death sentences. More than half of all prisoners currently sentenced to death in the U.S. have been on death row for more than 18 years. While on death row, those serving capital sentences are generally isolated from other prisoners, excluded from prison educational and employment programs, and sharply restricted in terms of visitation and exercise, spending as many as 23 hours a day alone in their cells. An inmate that spent 31 years on Texas death row, Lester Leroy Bower Jr. Lester Leroy Bower Jr. was born on November 20, 1947, in Arlington, Texas. A college-educated chemical salesman. In the early summer of 2008, the woman known as Witness Number 1 sat in the living room of her East Texas home and told me the following story. It was the second weekend of October 1983, and her boyfriend at the time, a man named Lynn, seemed particularly agitated, she said. He finally explained why as the two of them were driving through Sherman, a small city in a rural area an hour north of Dallas. A dope deal near Sherman had gone sour, Lynn said, and he and 3 accomplices, guys who went by Chess, Rocky and Bear, had to kill 4 people. The bodies of the 4 men were discovered in the hangar about the same time. The victims included 1 current and 1 former cop, a home builder and interior designer. 3 of the men were found wrapped in carpet inside the hangar. The 4th was found by the door, apparently killed as he tried to flee. All of the victims had been shot in the head, killings described at the time as execution style. The slaughter dominated North Texas headlines for days, and Shari Bower even mentioned it to her husband. But Bower kept his secret that he had been to the hangar the day of the crime, from her and everyone else. Bower was arrested after pieces of the ultralight were found in his home. Prosecutors later argued he killed the 4 men to conceal his theft of the aircraft. At trial, a state witness linked Bower to what was described an exotic brand of ammunition used in the killings. His defense attorneys have since demonstrated that the ammunition was much more commonly available than the state had argued at Bower's trial. In any event, the most damning evidence was Bower's own initial duplicity. On the advice of his attorney, he did not take the stand to try and explain his numerous lies. Jurors deliberated 2 hours before finding him guilty. Unlike many in his circumstances, Bower did not lack for the finest legal representation. A high-powered Washington, D.C., law firm, Morgan, Lewis and Bockius, had taken his case pro bono, spending thousands of hours in his defense. The defense lawyers and their investigators quickly determined that the 4 men accused by the new witness did indeed exist. and were known by authorities to have engaged in the manufacture and sale of methamphetamine in southern Oklahoma, just across the Texas border from Sherman. But Bower's legal team began to bump headlong into various realities of American jurisprudence. One problem was that the appellate process in state and federal courts focuses on procedural and constitutional issues, that is, whether a defendant received a fair trial. Bower arguably did. On April 28, 1984, petitioner Lester Leroy Bower was convicted in a Texas court of murdering 4 men. Each of the 4 men had been shot multiple times. Their bodies were left in an airplane hangar, and an ultralight aircraft was missing. The state sought the death penalty. Bower introduced evidence that was, in his view, mitigating. He noted that he was 36 years old, married, employed full-time, and a father of 2. He had no prior criminal record. Through the testimony of Bower's family members and friends, the jury also heard about Bower's religious devotion, his commitment to his family, his community service, his concern for others, his even temperament, and his lack of any previous violent or criminal behavior. At the time of Bower's sentencing, Texas law permitted the jury to consider this mitigating evidence only insofar as it was relevant to 3 special issues. Whether the conduct of the defendant that caused the death of the 4 victims was committed deliberately and with the reasonable expectation that the victims' deaths would result. After Bower's conviction, his lawyers argued the prosecution had withheld information relating to a police tip that the killings may have been connected to drug trafficking. Noting the high level of drug activity in the area and Tate's history of selling cocaine. Further questions concerning Bower's innocence were raised in 1989, when a woman called Pearl called one of Bower's attorneys, explaining that the killings were the result of a drug deal gone wrong, and that her ex-boyfriend Lynn and 3 of his friends, Chess, Rocky and Bear, were responsible. The defense lawyers also argued that the Fiocchi ammunition type was not rare, was widely sold for small game shooting and practice shooting, and the state prosecutors knew this at the trial. Bower's fingerprints were not found at the scene. No witnesses saw him there. No murder weapon was recovered. Bower didn't confess. And DNA testing wasn't available in 1984. Now a state district judge has stopped a scheduled July 22 execution for Bower and has agreed to consider his request that evidence in the case be examined to see whether DNA testing could back up his quarter-century-long claims of innocence. Prosecutors, who say the testing is a delaying tactic, said the salesman with a long marriage, 2 daughters and no record of criminal activity or mental health problems just snapped. It happens, they said. On June 3, 2015, Bower was executed by lethal injection in the Huntsville unit and pronounced dead at 6:36 p.m. on June 3, 2015. In his final statement, Bower thanked his family and friends for their support, as well as his attorneys, saying, "I have fought the good fight, I held my faith. I am not going to say goodbye, I will simply say, until we meet again. I love you very, very much." Lester Leroy Bower Jr. was 67 years at the time of his execution. Thank you for watching Death Row.